Chances are you've heard of Bernie Madoff and his infamous Ponzi scheme. He conned thousands of hardworking Americans out of their savings and raked in more than $50 billion. But before his arrest, Madoff was a well-respected New York financier. How exactly did he go from a trusted financial guru to the most hated man in America? The truth is that he made enemies in high places and likely would have gotten away with his crimes if not for their involvement. Thankfully, he was exposed, and his victims received at least partial compensation, but not before he effectively pulled off the biggest scam in history. To make off with billions, Madoff used a so-called Ponzi scheme, which lures investors in by guaranteeing unusually high returns. The name originated with Charles Ponzi, who promised 50% returns on investments in only 90 days. Ponzi schemes are run by a central operator, who uses the money from new incoming investors to pay off the promised returns to older ones. This makes the operation seem profitable and legitimate, even though no actual profit is being made. Meanwhile, the person behind the scheme pockets the extra money or uses it to expand the operation. To avoid having too many investors reclaim their profits, Ponzi schemes encourage them to stay in the game and earn even more money. The investing strategies used are vague and/or secretive, which schemers claim is to protect their business. Then all they need to do is tell investors how much they are making periodically, without actually providing any real returns. Ponzi schemes usually aren't very sustainable. The setup eventually falls apart. After the operator takes the remaining investment money and runs, new investors become harder to find, meaning the flow of cash dies out, or too many current investors begin to pull out and request their returns. In Madoff's case, things began to deteriorate after clients requested a total of $7 billion back in returns. Unfortunately for Madoff, he only had $200 to $300 million left to give. Another reason Madoff managed to fly under the radar for so long, despite multiple reports to the SEC about suspicions of a Ponzi scheme, is because Madoff was a well-versed and active member of the financial industry. He started his own market maker firm in 1960 and helped launch the NASDAQ stock market. He sat on the board of National Association of Securities Dealers and advised the Securities and Exchange Commission on trading securities. It was easy to believe this 70-year-old industry veteran knew exactly what he was doing. Madoff really only made off with $20 billion, even though on paper he cheated clients out of $65 billion, according to CNN Money. Aside from the impact on stocks overall, the exposure of fraud on a massive scale is also devastating to individuals who trusted Madoff with their fortunes, and to nonprofit organizations like Yeshiva University, which counted on Madoff's purported secret trading system to help operate its institutions. Sterling Equities, the investment vehicle of the Wilpon family, which owns the New York Mets baseball team, had $300 million reportedly invested in Ascot. So did some wealthy investors who had money in related hedge funds who were never informed of ties to Ascot. Another private bank executive placed $10 million from a client. He knew of another family that had $100 million with Madoff. A woman in California stated that she had lost everything with Madoff, and another hedge fund. Some of Madoff's more illustrious investors included a charitable organization funded by Steven Spielberg, large banks and pension funds such as Spanish bank Banco Santander, HSBC, Royal Bank of Scotland, Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, and Korea Teachers Pension were scammed by Madoff as well. Some of Madoff's individual investors ended up on the street, living out of cars and RVs. Madoff's final hours before he was caught were extremely dramatic. Madoff asked his closest friends and family for money in the final weeks before his arrest, including Wall Street financier Kenneth Langone, whose office was sent a 19-page pitch book, allegedly created by the staff at the Fairfield Greenwich Group. Madoff said he was raising money for a new investment vehicle, between $500 million and $1 billion for exclusive clients, was moving quickly on the venture and wanted an answer by the following week. Langone declined. In November, Fairfield announced the creation of a new feeder fund. However, it was far too little and far too late. By the week after Thanksgiving, Madoff knew he was at the end of his tether. The Chase account, which at one point in 2008 had well over $5 billion, was down to only $234 million. With banks having all but stopped lending to anyone, he knew he could not even begin to borrow enough money to meet the outstanding redemption requests. On December 4th, he told Frank DePascali, who oversaw the Ponzi scheme's operation, that he was finished. He directed DePascali to use the remaining balance on the Chase account to cash out the accounts of relatives and favored investors. On December 9th, he told Peter that he was on the brink of collapse. The following morning, December 10th, he suggested to his sons Mark and Andrew that the firm pay out over $170 million in bonuses 2 months ahead of schedule from the $200 million in assets that the firm still had. According to the complaint, Mark and Andrew, reportedly unaware of the firm's pending insolvency, confronted their father, asking him how the firm could pay bonuses to employees if it couldn't pay its investors. At that point, Madoff asked his sons to follow him to his apartment, where he admitted that he was finished and that the asset management arm of the firm was in fact a Ponzi scheme. As he put it, one big lie. Mark and Andrew then reported him to the authorities. On June 29th, a federal judge sentenced Madoff to 150 years in prison, as recommended by the prosecution. Chin said he had not received any mitigating letters from friends or family testifying to Madoff's good deeds, saying that the absence of such support is telling. Commentators noted that this was in contrast to other high-profile white-collar trials such as that of Andrew Fastow, Jeffrey Skilling, and Bernard Ebbers, who were known for their philanthropy and/or cooperation to help victims. However, Madoff's victims included several charities and foundations, and the only person that pleaded for mercy was defense lawyer Ira Sorkin. Unsurprisingly, the allegations and conviction led to a huge rift in Madoff's family. Madoff's two sons, Mark and Andrew, both worked in his firm, but were isolated to a side of the business not directly connected with the Ponzi scheme Madoff was running. Both have been named in lawsuits and have been under investigation, but neither was named in criminal charges relative to the $50 billion Ponzi scheme. 2 years to the day after Madoff was arrested for running a Ponzi scheme, his son Mark Madoff committed suicide in his New York City apartment building. He did not leave a suicide note, but both brothers were very bitter toward their father and had not spoken to either of their parents in 2 years. Ruth Madoff, Bernard's wife, settled with the feds for $2.5 million and quit seeing Madoff in prison in order to reconcile with her son Andrew. She revealed that she and Bernie made a suicide pact before he revealed his Ponzi scheme, but didn't go through with it.
I don't know whose idea it was, but we decided to kill ourselves. I said, I just can't go on anymore.
Though it still only represents a tiny fraction of the amount he stole, authorities are still recovering Madoff's assets and giving the proceeds to the victims of his scheme. Most recently, they're set to receive another $695.3 million from a government compensation fund. The payout, the third made by the Madoff Victim Fund, will be distributed to 27,000 victims of the infamous scammer around the world. It will bring the total paid out to victims so far to nearly $2 billion, out of more than a total of $4 billion that will eventually be paid. It will bring the total paid out to victims so far to nearly $2 billion, out of more than a total of $4 billion that will eventually be paid. The payments announced today could not have happened without the prosecutors' relentless pursuits of proceeds of Madoff's fraud through civil forfeiture, said the lead prosecutor. Victims who would not have seen a dime in other compensation programs will now recover more than half of their losses. However, the FBI Assistant Director said in a statement, "While today's distribution of funds is indeed significant in scope, we understand no amount of money could ever restore the damage done by Madoff as a result of his selfish behavior and unforgivable financial crimes." Money for the fund came from the estate of one of Madoff's closest friends, Jeffrey Pickoware, a top investor who profited from Madoff's scam. His estate handed over $2.2 billion to pay back the victims. Madoff's scam is by far the largest financial swindle in human history, but there were many others who made off with millions over the years. For instance, in 1993, a prospector named Michael de Guzman walked out of the jungle of Borneo with extraordinary news. He found gold. For the next 3 years, Guzman produced thousands of core samples. During that period, the market value of Guzman's employer, Brex Minerals, went from nothing to $6 billion. Business Week notes that Wall Street's top analysts were extremely bullish on the stock. Big funds poured money into the stock and the world's major miners wrestled for a piece of the action. The problem? There was no gold. As the story unraveled, records mysteriously burned and people unexpectedly died. Questions were left unanswered. Troubles began for Brex when the Indonesian government started inspecting the mining site. From here, the fraud began to unravel rapidly on March 19, 1997, when Filipino Brex geologist Michael de Guzman reportedly committed suicide by jumping from a helicopter in Indonesia. A body was found 4 days later in the jungle, missing the hands and feet, and with a penis surgically removed. In addition, the body was reportedly mostly eaten by animals and was only identified from molars and a thumbprint. A conspiracy theory exists because, according to journalist John McBeth, a body had gone missing from the morgue of the town from which the helicopter flew. The remains of de Guzman were found only 400 meters from a logging road. No one saw the body except another Filipino geologist who claimed it was de Guzman, and one of the 5 women who considered themselves his wife was receiving monetary payments from someone long after the supposed death of de Guzman. A week later, on March 26, 1997, the American firm Freeport-McMoran, a prospective partner in developing Busang, announced that its own due diligence core samples, led by Australian geologist Colin Jones, showed insignificant amounts of gold. A frenzied sell-off of shares ensued, and the company's financials plunged into darkness. Brex demanded more reviews and commissioned a review of the test drilling. Results were not favorable to them, and on April 1, 1997, Brex refused to comment. Canadian gold analyst Agizio Bianchini of BMO Nesbitt Burns considered the rumors preposterous. A third-party independent company, Strathcona Minerals, was brought in to make its own analysis. They published their results on May 4, 1997. The Busang ore samples had been salted with gold dust. The lab's test showed that gold in one hole had been shaved off gold jewelry, though it has never been proved at what stage this gold had been added to those samples. This gold also occurs in quantities that do not support the actual original assays. Trading in Brex was soon suspended on the TSE and NASDAQ, and the company filed for bankruptcy protection.